So, Central America and the Caribbean. So, we are going to be talking about Central America and the Caribbean today. This is the third section of notes over Latin America. So, this is the Caribbean. This is what we're going to be talking about. Is this part right here? This is the part that's Latin America. These are a part of the Caribbean as well, but these are not so much part of Latin America. They're more English speaking, more like British colonies than Spanish or Brazilian colonies. So we're really going to be talking about this section of the Caribbean and then, of course, Central America right here. Okay, so the population pattern. So there's a huge influence of the Spanish, the Dutch, and African influences in the Caribbean. Um, We know this because they speak Spanish. Big Dutch influence because some of the Caribbean islands they actually speak Dutch. And then also we know there's a huge African influence because of the slave trade. And we know that a lot of slaves were brought to South America, the Caribbean and Central America, and North America during the slave trade. And I have a map I'll show you here in a little bit, but it'll show you the number of slaves that were brought to the various places in the New World. And I think you guys will be surprised at the numbers. Central America, people live in the highlands and along the Pacific coast. The Caribbean islands have the highest population density in the region. So in all of Latin America, the Caribbean has the highest population density, which makes sense if you think about it, logically. The Caribbean islands are very small; they're teeny tiny islands, and they have a pretty good sized population. So, not a lot of space, quite a lot of people, high population density. Whereas, other parts that we've talked about of Latin America so far, they have a pretty good land size, right? It's a pretty big country. And those people are more spread out. Where in the Caribbean, those people are really congested into one small area. And so urban areas, so city resources are strained by overpopulation. Um, Again, we talked about the population density just in the last slide. You have a lot of people in a small area. They tend to be congested in cities because there is not a lot of rural area. There's not a lot of land. So because of that, people don't really own land. The price of owning property is very, very high in the Caribbean islands. So most people are renting or squatting or living in very limited housing like shanty towns. And you can see pictures on the right here of what these shanty towns look like. They're literally made out of leftover materials. They're made out of pieces of plywood, pieces of sheet metal, um, whatever they can find, and they build these houses to live in until they can earn enough money to rent an apartment or rent a house or live in a nicer area. Um, and these shanty towns are on the outskirts of cities. They're often built outside of the main downtown area. They're built towards the industrial part of the city, or they're built under underpasses or some area of the city where the land is not really used. Poverty rates are very, very high in the Caribbean, as well as parts of Central America. And this just means people are living below poverty level, which means that they're making less than what the average person makes. And they have a lot of people that are making less than average amount of money. A lot of people work in gig economies. They work in the tourism industry. And I just want you guys to think for a second. Think right now with COVID, right? There's no cruises going to the Caribbean right now. No one is flying out of the country into the Caribbean. People are not traveling there. So a lot of people are completely out of work in the Caribbean because their entire livelihood relies on tourists coming to their islands and visiting, and they're selling those tourists, shirts and necklaces and drinks and food and trinkets and stuff like that. Well, there's no one there buying that now. So where are they making their money from? They're not. Their economy is completely stopped. So the poverty rates are even higher now than they were last year. Okay. So the history, we've heard of Christopher Columbus before. In fact, I think today is Columbus Day. I think no one celebrates it anymore, but um, it's Columbus Day. Columbus arrives in the New World in 1492. He sails for the Spanish crown. He is actually Italian, but he was hired by the Spanish to discover a new trade route to China and India. And he thought that if you just sailed west of Spain, you would wrap around and you would end up in China or India. He was one of the first people that really took this idea that the earth is round. Before this, the popular belief was that the earth was flat, and that if you sailed too far to the edges, that you would literally fall off the earth. We know this is not true now, but Columbus was one of the first people that really went out there, and he just sent it. He went to go and sail around the world and discover India or China. Well, there's a storm. He has 3 ships. The storm blows him off track, and he ends up a little bit farther south than he thought. And he ended up in a different place, and so he called it the West Indies because it's west of Spain. He thought of it as India, but really what it was Grand Turk, the island Grand Turk, and it was a Caribbean island. And so when he got there, he goes there. The indigenous people that are on the island come to greet him, and he immediately arrests and captures people to send back to Spain to show as proof that he discovered this new world. And he took their belongings and he took some of them as slaves. The 3 G's to remember with Columbus is his mission was to discover gold, to spread the word of God via Catholicism and convert new people to Catholicism, and glory. He told his men that if they went on this journey with him, they could take whatever they are able to take. So this is where the pillaging, the slavery, all of this comes from. The men that worked for Columbus knew that Columbus would let them take belongings from indigenous people. They could take the people, they could take all their stuff. And so people that were about that signed up to go and work for Columbus on these expeditions. One of the unfortunate outcomes of Columbus discovering the New World is that he spreads a disease called smallpox. And in Europe, smallpox was fairly common, but in this New World, no one had smallpox. So when this disease was brought to the New World, it's estimated that it killed 1 out of 3 indigenous people within the first 20 years of European contact with Native Americans in the Caribbean, North America, and Central America. And so smallpox killed, it's estimated, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people during Columbus's first expeditions. Okay, so the Columbian Exchange is the movement of plants, animals, humans, and disease between Europe and Latin America. Now, this is one of the positive sides of Columbus discovering this new world, is that Europe had things and the New World had things, and they both didn't have the same items, the same things, same resources. So what they were able to do was bring stuff from Europe to the New World and take stuff from the New World and send it back to Europe. So over here on the right, you have all the things that existed in Europe. So for example, in the New World, there were no horses. There was no cows, no chickens, no pigs, no bananas, no citrus fruits, none of that. And in the New World, they had potatoes, tomatoes, tobacco, turkeys, beans, chocolate. Europe didn't have any of that. So after Columbus discovers this and they start setting up trade routes going back and forth between Europe, Africa, and the New World, and then from the New World back to Europe, they start exchanging these goods. Okay, and so I just want you to think of a world where Italy does not have tomatoes. They don't make pasta, they don't make pizza. I want you to think of a world where in the United States, we don't have chicken. It's crazy. So the exchange of these goods is known as the Columbian Exchange, and it's just a result of Columbus discovering this new world. So this is a very important side effect of Columbus discovering the New World. Okay, so this is, again, just stuff from the Old World to the New World. So these are just belongings that were brought from Europe, and these are things that were brought from the New World back to Europe. Okay, now we're fast forwarding. So Cuba is a Caribbean island in the Caribbean, and it is a communist country. It fell to communist rule in 1959. This communist revolution was led by 2 men, Fidel Castro, and Che Guevara. And Fidel Castro was like the figure, the leader. Che Guevara was a general that was very popular with the people, but once Fidel Castro successfully captures and converts Cuba to a communist country, he kills Che Guevara. And communism it's a very simple type of government that we discussed when we were talking about government and economies, is that communism is that everyone is at the same level. So you don't have rich people, you don't have poor people. Everyone is just the same. Essentially, everyone's poor. And communism is very totalitarian. Which means the government has total control. So they tell you what you can and cannot do. They tell you what you can and can't wear. They tell you what you can and cannot say. You don't have these individual liberties and freedoms that like we have in our country, and you don't have that in a communist country. So Cuba is still communist to this day. They're one of the few communist countries left in the world. You have China, North Korea, and Cuba, the three communist countries left. And because of this, Cuba is very poverty. There's a lot of poverty in Cuba. A lot of people struggle to make ends meet, especially now with COVID. You have no tourism. People aren't trading. It's a very difficult time, and especially in a place like Cuba, where they have very, very few allies. Okay, so culture, language and religion. They speak English in some of the Caribbean islands. They speak French in some of the Caribbean islands, Dutch, and then Spanish. Spanish is the most common language throughout Latin America, but in the Caribbean islands, depending who colonized it, because the French colonized some islands, the British colonized some islands, the Dutch colonized some islands, they will speak the languages of their colonizing country. Many islands have their own dialect. I want you guys to think of, we speak English, but so do people in Jamaica. And people in Jamaica sound a lot different than we do, and we sound a lot different to them than they do. So many islands have their own dialect, which is kind of like their own sound and style of the language. Roman Catholicism is the most popular religion throughout the Caribbean and Central America, but there are other fringe religions like Rastafarianism and others, syncretism, stuff like that. Okay, education and healthcare, it depends on the wealth of the country. So depending what country you're in and how wealthy that country is really determines what type of education you receive or what type of healthcare you receive. One thing I remember is that when I was traveling in the Caribbean, I was in Honduras, which is in Central America, and I remember I went to a restaurant and I was there, and in the Caribbean, they're always trying to sell you things. So I'm in this restaurant and I'm drinking like a espresso. It's like breakfast time, like early in the morning, like brunch. And so I was eating like a sandwich and I had a coffee. And there was this little boy who was probably like my son's age. He was probably like 7 or 8. And he was carrying like, if you go to like a sports game and they have the guys selling like popcorn and stuff in the stands and they're carrying like that wire thing with the straps over their shoulder and they're like selling stuff, right? Well, this boy, he was like 7 or 8 and he was selling tobacco and cigars, cigarettes, and cigars, and tobacco. And he was going around selling it to the patrons in the store. And I remember asking him, I was like, hey, shouldn't you be in school? Like, don't you go to school? And he shook his head and I said, do you want to go to school? And he went, I said, how come you don't go to school? And he told me that his school that he would have to go to is on the other side of the island and that it's like 16 miles away and they have no buses and his family has no car. So he had to walk. And his mom, who worked at the restaurant, said that she didn't want him walking all the way across the school. So she brought him to work and got him a job selling tobacco and cigars. So I just think of that when I'm talking about this, is that the distance of schools keep many students away. A lot of parents look at education and schooling as a luxury. They look at it like buying a Ferrari versus being something that you should have your children do. So you don't need a Ferrari to survive. You can just walk or get like a cheaper car or whatever. Well, that's how a lot of people feel about education in some of these places that we discuss. Healthcare is also linked to the standard of living. So a lot of people who are at that poverty line or below it don't have adequate health care, and they are relying on like free clinics, religious clinics, and like the Red Cross and other foundations that go to these places to try and provide a semblance of healthcare to people who can't afford it. Okay, arts, so reggae music, it's a type of music. Calypso music, it's known as steel drum. Sometimes it's called island music or easy listening. Sometimes it's called high life. You can probably guess why it's called high life. But those are two styles of music that originate from the Caribbean. And we were talking about Mexico being patriarchal. Well, in the Caribbean, it's matriarchal, which means women are in charge of the family. The mother is the center of the family, and she's the most important figure. This stems from the fact that a large majority of people that live in the Caribbean are descendants of people who were brought to the Caribbean or Central America via the slave trade. So this idea of matriarchy comes from West Africa. So when we talk about Africa in Geography B, either in try 2 or 3, we're going to talk about the matriarchy more in West Africa. Cricket and baseball are the most popular sports. Baseball is king down there, especially in the Caribbean. It's the most popular form of sports. It's the cheapest sport to play. You need a ball, you need a bat, you need some bases, and a field, and you can play the sport. And a lot of people view baseball as a way out of poverty in the Caribbean. So if you, even if you're not a huge sports fan or anything, if you just watch a baseball game that's on TV, one of the Major League Baseball teams, 2/3, 75% of Major League Baseball players come from the Caribbean, and they make a lot of money playing professional baseball. So families will have children of 5 or 6; they'll all play baseball, and they hope that 1 or 2 of them make it to the United States to play baseball, because if they do, that's generational wealth. The amount of money they would make, they can bring back, give back to their family, and their family is set for the next couple of generations. It's a very important thing for a lot of people. So they take the sport really seriously. It's not just something to do. They look at it as a way out of a less than desirable lifestyle. The islands have a very relaxed culture. So even though people do live in poverty, even though there are healthcare, educational, and economic problems, they live in the Caribbean. It's beautiful. They have clear ocean water. They have nice weather year round. The only major thing they have to worry about is hurricanes and tropical storms, but it's very relaxed. I mean, people in the United States, Canada, and Europe, we pay good money, thousands of dollars to go on vacation to the Caribbean for just a couple of days or a week maybe. They live there. So it's a very relaxed, beautiful culture. Carnival is a Catholic celebration. It's like Lent, and they celebrate for an entire month during March through April. It's about 4 weeks, and they have Carnival, which is huge celebrations, parades, rides, food, all that stuff. All right, that's it for the notes. Thanks for watching.